Welcome everyone to tonight's tour and talk for the exhibition Force of Nature, which features the work of Joan Wadleigh Curran, Andrea Krupp, Kellyann Monahan, and Victoria Rolett. I'm happy that all the artists are with us tonight. We are Cerulean Arts Gallery, and we're located in Philadelphia. The exhibit is up through October 24th, so you're welcome to see it in person if you can. But everything is also available on our website. So I'll put a link to the site in the chat. You can check that out at some point. So I'm going to spotlight Tina's video. Oops. And we're going to walk through the exhibit and stop along the way and have the artists speak about the work that we're seeing. And if you have questions, you can feel free to ask them. We're a small group tonight, so that should be fine. So in this view, we have a piece by Joan, then Andrea in the middle, and the large work by Victoria. So would one of the artists like to, well, I guess Tina's zeroing in on Joan, so I guess you're up first, if you don't mind.
Oh, that's fine.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and this particular piece?
Okay, this piece is a collage, and I make the collages from a combination of things. This has an etching and also woodcuts. What I do is I print the image on different papers with different inks. Then I cut them up and collage them together. So that gives me the ability to play with lots of shapes and composition and whatever.
Can you speak a little bit about the themes in your work?
Well, this one, the collages are a little bit different than the paintings in that they don't have the climate change issues that a lot of the paintings do. But I'm very interested in the interaction of people and their environment, or people and nature. And I've been concentrating lately on the issues of climate change, particularly the fires that have taken place in California and other places. Well, we were looking at the collage image that I've been doing the collages as an adjunct to the paintings. So they allow me to work a little bit more quickly than the paintings. And although they're very different thematically to some degree, I think for me, they feel not that different, because I basically in the paintings am interested in issues of composition and color and placement, color interactions and whatever. So although that the subject is a little bit different, I think they feel fairly similar to me in terms of the making of them. I'm sort of interested in issues of abstraction in some way, even though they're representational images, in that it's thinking about composition and color, shape.
Thank you, Joan.
It's nice to see them side by side like that, and sort of zooming in, and kind of emphasizes, the formats that they both share with the square image there. I hadn't really noticed that parallel in the gallery, but with the camera zooming in on these little artworks, it's fun to see them this way. The resolution looks really good. And this is a subtle piece. So my name is Andrea. This is one of a series of, calling them broadsides. They're pieces. This is an actual quote from literature in the text below the image. In other of the series, I've done my own writing and presented my own poetry. And these were part of, this was produced during the time that I was creating a visual culture exhibition about Pennsylvania anthracite coal. And one of
Andrea,
the,
Andrea, your audio is breaking up a bit on our end.
Yeah, I'm having trouble
I
hearing
hope
you
I'm
too.
not have trouble. All right, I hope that things come back. I'm rambling on about where these came from.
Yeah, we still can't hear you too well.
Oh, no.
So, and you're frozen, your image is frozen. So maybe your
Uh,
internet is acting up.
yes, I'm gonna do a trick that someone told me, which was to turn off my phone Wi-Fi.
Okay, we'll skip
You
over.
can jump,
Yeah, we'll skip
jump
to
over.
Victoria and come back to you.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right. This is my large piece. This one is a little larger than 40 inches on either side. So a lot of my works come out of intense observation of my environment and trying to decipher the social and historical values that I see in those places. And a lot of my works, because I live right along the Long Island Sound in Westchester, New York, a lot of my works have to do with rising waters and flooding waters. So this piece was inspired by Manor Park. I went there one day and the water was really high. The tide was really high. And one thing I've noticed a lot is that the tide is a lot higher than the structures around it were meant to handle. And so I had this there was this dock in the middle, which is this structure that you can see there, and it was just like pulling against the chains, and so this piece really is utilizing that kind of feeling of the water kind of pushing along the edges of the artwork. I have my requisite dead horseshoe crab here. They're such an ancient species, and every time I see a dead one, I get concerned. I'm like, is this from us? Did it die naturally? So I have seen them kind of floating around before, as well as some garbage. When the waters get really high, they tend to wash a lot of debris into the water. On the edges of the artwork, so you can see on the left side, there's this kind of pagoda, and there, if you look closely, there's like the north-south sign, and it's kind of edging towards south with this downward arrow. So for me, this is like a very humorous element. I don't want to be, I don't want to be super sad all the time when I think about these things. So I'm thinking a lot about how the world is changing and how it's affecting our environment and our landscape in the way that we shape things. And the hope is that, we start to think about it a little bit more, that it's not just that the tide is higher than normal. Every time there's a high tide, our landscape starts to get washed out. And if we don't want these things, we need to think about them deeper.
Thanks, Victoria. So Andrea, are you back?
Can you hear me now?
A little bit. Okay, let's have a go at it.
Oh, maybe I just need to turn up the volume. How's that? You can hear me now. Is that good?
So your image is frozen too in your
Oh,
video.
It happens sometimes. I'm not sure why.
Okay, it's not bad, so we'll plow through.
And Andrea, if you turn your video off, sometimes that helps the sound quality.
Oh, interesting. Well, we could try that. And I can tell you about this piece. Right, so my overarching, I think the underlying thing, besides being about coal, these pieces are also about carbon, and that's my way of addressing the large issues of climate change, and not only just that, but our entire relationship with the extra human world, right? The materials that we interact with, the materials that we extract and use, and how the flow of these materials, in particular the carbon, are adding up to something that we really need to pay attention to. How's it sounding? Is this frustrating for everybody?
It's choppy. It's choppy. Do you want to try turning your video off?
Off. I think I have it off. It's not off.
Oh, yeah, we still see you.
Oh, you do. See,
But you're frozen.
I had turned off the video, and something's wrong with my.
Do you want to try logging out and coming back in?
I think that would be best.
Okay.
Okay, see you in a second. Carry on.
Right.
Sorry about that.
Well, that's Zoom, so what are you going to do?
I don't know, but
All right, we'll see you in a bit. All right, Kellyanne, you're up.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I was going to say maybe Andrea could add a few statements about her work in the chat as another way to add to the conversation. Yes. I've been there. My art studio actually has terrible internet. I have to work from home or at school when I do these kind of things. Anyway, my name is Kellyanne Monahan. This is one of my freshest paintings. I probably completed this about a month ago and decided last minute to add it to the show, and gratefully Michael and Tina added the piece to the exhibition. I've been working for a number of years about climate change. I've been primarily a landscape painter, and for many years a landscape painter working from observation. And a number of years ago, I was struck by images of storms, actually like on clickbait videos. And I started to make paintings in response to both literal climate change and also the turmoil of our times. And also, again, if you look into the history of landscape painting, there are a number of other artists who have touched on climate change or storms or natural disasters as a way of responding to the landscape, both its beauty and also how frightening it can be. And the particular series of paintings that I have in this exhibition are ones also about the forest fires. And I have usually a very visceral and strong response when I'm working from the images or when I see the images of the fires. Oftentimes I'm piecing together a number of images from video stills based on what I see from the forest fires. And again, it's a response, I think, similar to Victoria. I'm kind of responding to what's happening in the world, my concerns for the world, sometimes my own inner turmoil and anxieties about the world. And at the same time, responding to all of my years of being a landscape painter and admiring the beauty of the landscape and seeing this dichotomy in how we respond to the landscape, our lives in the landscape, and how nature can be both very powerful and beautiful simultaneously.
Thank you. So Joan, we're coming to one of your bigger oil paintings.
So I initially started working with an interaction of people and their environment when I had a residency in New Orleans after Katrina. And I got particularly interested in the interface of people and their environment and the strength of the storm. So some of my work has included storms, but I think most of the things that are in the Cerulean exhibit are actually having to do with the fires in California and other places. This image is a composite, so in terms of source material. So I've used internet photographs, a composite of several for the background of the fires, and then the dock plant in the three green branches in the front are actually ones that I picked in Philadelphia and worked actually from observation. And then the wire that goes across the painting is actually from behind my studio, where there's a piece of wire with a dead plant growing through it. So I really manufactured the image from different source material. Again, interested in composition and color.
Joan, I have a question for you. When you talked about your collage earlier, the source material for your collages are like the flowers and like the collage elements. Are they collage elements that you're creating, or are you sourcing them from secondary resources? Like, or are they all of the pieces, components that you've made?
Yes, they are. Well, most of the components, yes, are. I actually use things from my roof garden, and then also some things from plant catalogs and whatever, and actually make either woodcuts or etchings that I then print in different ways, and then I cut those up to make the collages. And I have used a little bit of a sort of vintage plant catalog where I've used a couple images from that, but that's very rare that I've done that. But just in terms of a different shape or color, then I've used a few of those things. But most of them are sourced from woodcuts and etchings that I've made, just printed in different ways. And then I cut them up. So because I print them on different colored papers with different colored inks, then I can stretch the image in terms of make it be seen in many different ways because it's printed differently.
Thank you, Joan. And we're still waiting on Andrea to make it back. So we'll zero in on the corner here. And Victoria, will you speak about your sculpture?
Yes. So I've really become a very process-based artist. The process of creating the works allows me to kind of think about them and interpret them as I go. And it allows me to play a lot more with materials. So when you see this piece, it's a drawing on a curved piece of paper, and it's inside this kind of frame. And the frame is symbolic of the rock wall that you can see flooding in the image. And so it's kind of pieced together, but it's torn, and these darker areas start to resemble the cracks in the wall itself. And at the very back of the paper of the sculpture, there are like these, it might be hard to to see, but there are layers of paper kind of behind it, symbolizing the layers of erosion that happen, right? So the drawing itself is very figurative. We can really see the scene of you can see the water pooling, and it kind of starts to create these holes in the rock wall. It's actually, since this drawing, the rock wall has gotten a lot worse. I was just walking there this afternoon, and there is water kind of bubbling up. They've completely they've cordoned off parts of the wall. So it's a situation that I see actively deteriorating as the waters rise and we get more and more flooding. But I love this piece as kind of creating it was a very meditative process, kind of just thinking about the water flooding the wall. And then I really enjoyed the more textural element of the sculpture and making it as this thing that kind of stands, but it's also very fragile and erodes at the same time.
Victoria, I have a question for you. Are you influenced at all by like Japanese or Chinese ink scroll painting? The composition of this kind of like vertical composition brings to mind like Chinese, particularly Chinese ink drawing, I think, or Chinese scroll painting.
Yes. Yeah, no, I love that you brought that up. I'm definitely influenced. I'm not particularly influenced by any one artist, but I really love the way that they give us kind of these overviews of these large scenes. Because I feel that, you know, zooming in on one particular spot doesn't always give the full effect. I'm often interacting with these places through moving through them. So yeah, I definitely find influence in, yeah, in Chinese and even Japanese ink paintings for sure. And I love the way that they highlight certain elements. You know, they abstract in a way. The works are very figurative, but then, you know, they really take only specific information. They really think about the movement and the balance of the landscape, which I really appreciate.
Kellyann, there's another one of yours.
Sure. And like Joan and Victoria, I also have been making paintings about other, again, frightening events in nature, like storms. Actually, my last painting, it's my last exhibition I participated in at Cerulean 3 years ago, was all about water with one of my painter friends, Sarah Roach. Thinking about the process with these particular fire paintings, what I kind of become immersed in while I'm making the paintings is thinking about how the trees, so Victoria's talking about how like the rocks and the walls are becoming submerged by the water. And when I'm painting these paintings of the fire, I'm thinking about how or reflecting on how the trees are being submerged in the flames or in the smoke. And when I'm painting it, it almost becomes an abstracted process where some of the trees become completely lost in like the atmosphere of the smoke or become completely submerged in the fire, but others you can see are still holding on or are still apparent or kind of strong, you know, strongly standing there. So again, I'm thinking about how the trees are on one hand submerged by the fire, taken over by the fire, but are sometimes still standing. And something I talked about in person at the gallery 2 weeks ago was that I also have been reading about Native American traditions or indigenous traditions of having controlled burns as a way to control the landscape, that they would actually purposely set fire to parts of the landscape and actually control the direction of the fires. And I find that very interesting, and actually also as a nature process for life to come back, for nature to be reborn in a sense. Like there's actually part of the cycle, but there's also this terrible thing that's been happening, and these fires are really completely out of control.
Kellyann, as I keep looking at your paintings, I'm thinking a lot about the freshness of the brushstrokes and the way that, their quick movement almost represents like the way that the trees are just disappearing in the smoke. Does this influence a lot of the way that you paint them?
Absolutely, absolutely. So like my painterly reaction is like a physical, visceral response to actually what's happening in nature. Same thing if I'm painting a wave, like I want that wave to feel like, violently strong. So my brush, I want my mark and the surface tension to be responding to the actual tension or what's actually physically happening in nature. And as someone who's worked alla prima most of my painting life, or works kind of responds very directly to the landscape, this is like kind of another version, but again, more of like kind of a visceral symbolic reaction to what's happening. But yes, the way that the paint is painted is very literally responding to what I'm seeing happening in these spaces.
Kellyann, are these one-shot paintings, or are you?
Sorry, I muted my, primarily, yes. Sometimes I go back in and maybe, and that's a very important process to me, actually taken from the Japanese and Chinese tradition of ink drawing, that everything kind of has to happen fluidly in one moment, or over a series of like shorter moments. The physicality of the paint, almost like it being a performance, I want it to feel very pure within like a number of hour, like a couple of hours session. I don't like it when I have to go back into a painting and fuss with it. But occasionally I may hide a few extra touches, but I want it to look like it's happened all in one instance.
Thank you. So Joan, here's another of your pieces.
This piece actually, my daughter, my older daughter lives in LA, and this piece is actually from her garden. There were fires that were close by, and they were getting a lot of ash in their where they lived. But also she had this California thistle growing in her backyard, and I was trying to work with native flora for California with the fires that were there. So the background is, sourced from photographs of the fires in California, but the foreground is actually from Maris's garden. So we FaceTimed a lot, and I got to look at the plants in real time, and then she sent me photographs. I asked for her to photograph it from a lot of different points of view. So I tried to paint the flowers in different stages. Fully open, not quite open. Little gone past their prime.
So your work is more methodical, and you seem to be using a layered approach with your oil.
Yes.
But it's very thinly applied, it seems.
Yeah, it's not very thick, no, but there are many layers.
Yeah. Are they drying in between?
Yes, oftentimes I use a medium that usually dries mostly overnight, unless I use a lot of pigments that are slow dryers. Most of the painting is dry when I work on it again.
These are quite beautiful. I really see, especially in this piece, the relationship between your collages and your paintings.
Thanks. One of the reasons that, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is contrasting beauty with the horrific aspect of the fire. So I want both aspects to be there in the painting, because I think that obviously with climate change, we're sort of destroying the beauty around us. But I want the paintings to be very beautiful and not, so there's a kind of tension between what's beautiful and the horrific things that are happening in terms of the fire or flooding in some paintings.
I love how you enhance that idea by having the different stages of the flowers at different ages.
Yeah.
I can really relate to that sentiment, Joan. And something else that I like about your compositions is how you layer the spaces, like how you seem to juxtapose something up close versus something far away.
Yeah.
So this is another one of Joan's paintings, which is a very sobering subject.
Yeah, it's called Bird Disappearance. And, I was reading a lot about the fact that many birds, particularly songbirds, are biting the dust in terms of the numbers that are there. and the effect of climate change and the fires on their lives. And I sort of paint the background and then think about the bird actually leaving the picture plane. So it's sort of on, way over on the right side, as if it's flying out of the picture.
Giving us some hope.
What was that?
Giving us some hope that
Hope, yeah,
he'll get out of there.
hopefully,
She'll get out
right.
of there. Victoria, you like to work in a variety of scale or size here.
Yes, yes. So this one's a little bit smaller, and it's also mixed media, and again, very, very process oriented. So I walk by this graveyard every day. It's a historic graveyard, and the squirrel. I love, squirrels are they're such funny creatures. They'll go anywhere and eat their nuts. So he becomes this kind of hopeful creature in this, kind of, because it's a historic graveyard, I don't find it as desolate, except for, this gravestone that's kind of becoming overturned. So again, trying to pair this idea of like humor and tragedy and some beauty in there. So we have some flowers around some of the gravestones. I remember walking by this spot and thinking about a difficult student that I had who wouldn't do the project and just drew a squirrel instead, and how it was really beautiful drawing. So, there start to be all of these elements that kind of feed into it. But then again, thinking about the flooding waters, and this area actually flooded recently during Hurricane Ida, which is something that hadn't happened before. So this is the rock wall from the harbor, which is walking distance away. And just thinking about how it can all change very quickly. But the squirrel might still be there surviving. And there are many layers of collage in here. The rock wall was collaged on. There are actually there's some areas like on the rooftop and in the back left corner where I started actually kind of cutting and gluing, so I glued these trees on, and kind of like this whole, like we're looking through to the train tracks on the other side. So it's really trying to mine this space a little bit, and really give it depth and complexity, maybe a little bit of abstraction in top of this kind of raucous scene.
I think it's also, it's interesting how you have this kind of dark sense of humor, Victoria. Because also obviously the cemetery is also a reminder of our mortality as well. And what you've described along this river walkway rock wall makes me think of, on the other side of the Palisades, like towards New Jersey, there's a walk I've gone on a few times with a friend, and she sent me after Ida a video footage and photographs of the pavement along the trail got totally lifted. And it looks actually like an earthquake hit it. But you can see now all of the layers of cobblestone underneath. The cobblestone is all still there, but all of the more recent pavement has been totally destroyed. But it's interesting, the cobblestone is still intact under the pavement. But it's interesting, all those layers, right? They get revealed, what water can do, like in an instant.
Yeah, I love that it makes you think of your own experiences of those places, because that I think that's where some of the power comes from. Because for me, of course, these are, I have my own personal experiences with them, but they do reflect this larger experience that we are having, and we are each seeing in different places. And yes, the dark sense of humor, you know, it's joy and tragedy at the same time. You know, I think both you and I know Joan was saying this in her work, that, you know, you don't want it to be so terrible, but you want to also think about it. Yeah. And yes, the graveyards are dark. They do represent our mortality.
Here you are again, Kellyann. This is a much darker piece.
Right. It's called Smoldering, and I guess, well, when what I responded to in the image, or the desire to make the painting, was the contrast of those bright yellow, orange, like dancing flames against like kind of purple blue nocturne. And I guess it also made me connect to a large group of paintings that I did for many years of nocturnes of the city at night, where I was contrasting fluorescent lights or artificial light at night against the city sky. And what I found fascinating about making this painting was similar to how the trees, on one hand, are still standing, are resilient, trying to stand against the fire. They say at the same time almost disappear into the dark blues and into the purples. And there's again this contrast. I find a contrast of beauty, a contrast in beauty and fear and mystery, and kind of a sense of sublime.
It's great. Thank you. So I think we have Andrea with us again.
Perhaps.
Andrea, how's it?
Fingers crossed.
How's it going? How's it sound now?
I hear everything just
Okay.
fine. So I am
Right.
totally enjoying being along for the ride. If I start to break up again, just let me know and I'll
Well, we better get you while we can. So we're going to zero right in on your
awesome. We jumped over to this layered piece. So yeah, I was, I'm definitely looking for ways to communicate about climate change, but in a much more indirect way. And that might be a way of sort of preserving my own sort of sanity, like what you were both just saying about how, you know, there's only so much of these crises that we can take. And I certainly don't want my work to amplify people's stress levels. But I do want to present images that engage the viewer and cause maybe someone to step a little closer and slow down and try to read. Well, read it. When you see language in a piece, it does slow you down automatically. So in this case, the two main images that I've composed, you know, to make this sort of symbolic aesthetic statement, it's really about composition and graphic presentation of an idea. And the idea is that solid black shape represents the footprint of a turf-built structure from Iceland. And I was in Iceland when I did this piece. So, you know, obviously I'm pulling symbols and meaning from where I am. And a lot of my thinking about carbon actually did spring from my experience in Iceland, in that landscape. And then the fact that peat grows there and that peat is used there and extracted there became meaningful for me when I was thinking about Pennsylvania coal mines. And the tracery on top of that solid black image is a pencil drawing. It's actually literally a tracing of a coal mine map. And I thought it was interesting the way the forms spoke to each other. So I did a series like this where I was juxtaposing these heavy black graphic shapes with these silvery graphite lines that sort of appear and disappear as you look at the work. Yeah, and the black itself, the ink, I'm using carbon. Literally, I'm using soot in this piece mixed with acrylic medium. So I think this is sort of my artwork taking a strong material turn as I think about carbon, and I think about the materials that pass through my hands and the things, the literal things that I'm generating in the studio all require attention. And I think, anyway, just thinking and talking about carbon is, for me, has been a very interesting way in to learning about climate change and learning about the carbon cycle overall. And it will become, as we enter this period of energy transition into a hopefully post-carbon future, the main question I'm asking is, where does all the carbon go? And you know, we have to. So anyway, that's kind of where this piece led me to thinking, and that's where I am right now. It's enjoyable to talk about it and try to be a little more explicit about what underlies that graphic statement.
So Andrea, can you speak a bit about where your overarching theme of coal came from and some of the context?
Well, yeah, I was offered an opportunity to curate a historical visual art exhibit at the library company where I work as a conservator. And so that occupied my mind for the past 2 years. So they offered me an exhibit. I offered to do an exhibit that used our rare book and print materials to talk about climate change. But as everything kind of shifts and moves, the more you do your research, it became clear that what's so well represented in our historic collections is Pennsylvania coal. I mean, this is a very important coal region. And there's a deep, deep history of coal mining and coal building Philadelphia, coal contributing to the growth of steel, everything coal is. So anyway, that's all of the learning I've been doing over the past couple of years for my exhibit at the library company. And then these artworks sort of sprung out in parallel as I really started digging into the material in the studio and also responding to the historic materials that were informing me. And that area at the bottom of that image with all of those fine lines, this is a direct copy of the way certain documents from the 19th century look. This is the language of geological surveying. So in the artwork that at the exhibit, I also was showing historical materials, but I was also showing my artwork responding to those historical materials side by side. So this was an example of an artwork of mine that borrows visual encoding, visual language, visual meaning from historic documents. And that shows up in various ways throughout sort of this body of work. It was a wonderful experience to do that kind of deep thinking and tie in the historical influences, which have always been important in my work, but to be able to sort of show my work right next to the historical documents that I learned from was really, really fun, really interesting. And then to see them lifted out of that context and juxtaposed with contemporary artists who are dealing with, the same issues, carbon, the uncertain future. And we're all trying to cope with, this emotional moment that we find ourselves in and respond to it in a way that will make people stop and look and think a little differently about, what we're seeing unfolding all around us. And just there are many, many ways to do that. And I think artists are really critical in that conversation to help people process, the reality. without, making them want to shoot themselves in the head. It's really a fine line.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, how do we mirror what's happening, reflect on it, and process it?
Yeah.
I'm curious, Andrea, do you know how, I have no idea, how many, are there any functioning Pennsylvania coal mines, or how many functioning coal mines are still happening in Pennsylvania?
Yes, sir. Well, no more deep mining. And that's like a highly technical, very regional skill that developed over generations of mining in the hill country, in the anthracite fields. Now, all they're doing is strip mining because it takes less know-how. Maybe it's less dangerous. Certainly, they don't have to go up against flooding when they're in an open pit mine. So, but yeah, they are definitely still extracting anthracite for sure. Much less than before, much less, but still not less enough. They have to leave it all in the ground. No, that's probably not going to happen, but it has to happen. I mean, we cannot keep moving this carbon. And for me, all my learning sort of brought me back to that understanding. Coal has to stay in the ground. It's working as a vital carbon sink. And we are actively, this is what we've been doing, throwing that carbon up from underground and into the atmosphere through consumption. So we know very well what we have to do. We just don't know how to do it.
I love,
exactly.
Andrea, I love the poetic nature of your works. I was thinking when we were looking at the last one, that giant piece of coal and the weight of it, and it says immensity. I think it said immensity and depth.
Exactly.
And it made me think. I love I love J.R. Tolkien and The Hobbit.
Oh yeah.
In particular, and it made me think a lot about that, and in the way that he kind of took like these terrible stories of war and made this kind of metaphorical journey. But yeah, the way that you piece together the history and also the imagery of the coal itself is very beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I think it takes like so many different angles to make a commentary about such a complex issue. Yeah, so I really appreciate this, the theme of this exhibit, and I feel like artists are in a very good place to be, having a platform to say something meaningful and change culture, throw something out there.
So Victoria, we have two pieces by you here. One is sculptural.
Yes, and this is a great pairing of these two works. So this sculpture here is, it's really becomes like a physical rendition of what I had been illustrating, right? So you can really see now the water. I physically, made these waves in the water. Now it's just overtaking the wall. and it becomes visceral. So this piece is inspired by dioramas. Like I loved as a kid going to the Museum of Natural History, and you have those little historical dioramas. Usually they were Native Americans, in their villages. But I do like to have this kind of overview effect in my work, where I'm kind of like taking a step back from my personal experience and trying to look at it, from a different perspective. And dioramas, just the way that they kind of make everything so small and cute, and it's real, but it's not real. It kind of allows you to take it in without it kind of being aggressive. So yeah, and these are like real shells and real like I'm blanking on the name, but the reeds from the marshlands. So incorporating the physical elements from my walks. They're always from walks, along with my kind of diorama with the glossy gel. This is like me feeding my inner child, by having, you know, all of this texture and in the water. And then the side of the sculpture kind of represents the fragility. So you start to have it's like the layers of the land, you know, and they're kind of cracked and twisted, and you know, some places it becomes lower and some places it's higher, and you know, which will win, the land or the water.
The pairing is so beautiful. I was fascinated to see how these two pieces were hung and how they relate to each other and how they engage different kinds of seeing. And I think that's the interesting thing about those dioramas, like you were saying, is it's like a actual visual stage set, or like it's an imagined kind of space that you look at really differently from the flat surface of a painting. And I love how they're paired.
Thank you. Yeah, I like how you phrase that, the different ways of seeing. And yes, they definitely engage that. So this piece is, again, the same place, the same scene, right? So a lot of my works are very different, but they're all engaging with the same place. And so this one was inspired by, there was a lot of these reeds that had kind of washed way up onto the grass. And I was kind of, you know, my first thought is, why, you know, what is all this debris? And I came to the realization, so yes, you can see kind of the debris here, that it had been such a high tide that it left this tidal line on the grass. And this is like very, you know, like nice green manicured park grass. So it really had a strong contrast to it. And then this is kind of like my imagining of the action, right? So like I had the clues, and then this is my visualization of the water as it kind of comes up. And it also explained to me why we have a drain. So they you know, I mean, really, I think they have the drain they had a drain because it was a, you know, low lying area. This was all marshland at one point, right? So that doesn't help when, you know, we put in a rock wall, and, you know, we've kind of enclosed where the marshes can be. So they do have like a drain. So that was my my imagining. Now the drain, which was just to drain, you know, freshwater puddles, is now draining the sound water back into the sound.
It doesn't seem like it would be sufficient to handle the volume.
No, it's definitely, they definitely didn't account for that when they created that drain. And then there's, on the top left, you can see there's these, it's like this, there was a fence. They were doing construction, and they had this like fake green fabric over it, which I always find very humorous. You know, the idea of trying to emulate nature while doing something very man-made. So that, and then, you know, the contrast of the movement billowing out, you know, against the water that's really coming towards us.
So I'm interested in your use of materials, because you seem to toggle back and forth and in between sculpture and drawing and painting. Does it just work? Do you have like a plan for one or the other, or do they sort of evolve as you work on them?
You know, I'm trying to think of what inspired me to do this like diorama sculpture, but I really I like to keep moving in my work. So like often, like the piece, the two-dimensional piece on top, you know, that had just kind of started as a drawing. I was initially just enamored with the shape of the harbor. You know, they shape it into the, you know, this kind of perfect horseshoe, and then it just continued to evolve. And even I'm not sure if the idea of the water overflowing came first or the shape of the harbor, you know? So the process starts to become the layering of my mind and my experience of these places. And then there's always like some sort of resolution that points in one direction or the other. So like the debris of the marshland, that was like I took an eraser and I used my wood carving tools and I carved that into it and I actually stamped it on. So it just very I really like this kind of free form process, being able to look at things from different perspectives. And I never want making art to be really, I don't want to say difficult, but like I want making art to, you know, to be really a joyful process, even when it's, you know, representing my biggest anxiety. So that's where I really have developed this very process oriented way of creating. It reminds me very much so of being a kid and the way that I would follow myself then, because I often found, like I used to do a lot of oil paintings, and I often found that I would get stuck in the way, the idea of what it was supposed to be, and it would lose kind of an authenticity about what my real experience was and what I was trying to say, because we don't always know what we're trying to say the first time around.
Thank you. So Kellyanne, here's another one of yours.
Sure. So this one, I was thinking about multiple things. One, I guess it was like probably late spring or early summer where we were all feeling, at some point last year, we were feeling a little bit more hopeful that, you know, we were hoping the pandemic was, you know, coming to an end, or, you know, that things were starting to a certain point, you know, at least in the New York area, things were feeling a bit like more hopeful. Things were opening up more. So the fires also for me have been also connecting to how the pandemic has been surrounding us. And again, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of after the fire, how there's oftentimes this, you know, rebirth. This painting is actually called Rebirth, and an amazing growth of nature coming back. And also, again, connecting to what I was talking about earlier, and how Native Americans have for centuries had controlled burns or good fires. And the actual idea is that if the controlled fire will control how much vegetation there is, so that the vegetation later in the season, like in California, doesn't dry out and become these completely out of control fires. So there's actually, I think, like in California right now, they're actually talking to the Native communities or the indigenous communities about bringing back some of these controlled fire ceremonies, because for many years that's how the natives saw that it controlled the cycle of life in nature. So it's just very interesting to me that there's this idea that there can be such a thing as a controlled fire. And again, I was really interested in this idea of nature growing back, but with some of the flickering flames, a reminder that it could still be there, right? That this cycle of life is in constant process, constantly dying, you know, burning, you know, recreating, dying, burning, recreating, that nature is constantly bouncing back, but, you know, but ever so fragile.
Thank you. So Joan, we're coming up on another one of your larger oils.
So this is actually from my garden, and I have a roof garden that I tend to almost every day, and I really like watching the whole process of growth and regeneration, and things dying and then being reborn again. And one of the things that I am interested in is the fact that plants have a certain kind of strength to them, but then at the same time, we oftentimes use structures to support them. So I like this idea of of working with these structures that are man-made, that are actually aiding the vegetation. So I had this wire and this plastic support structure that I got at Home Depot, and I used them to support some of the plants that I had on the roof. So I got interested in the geometry of those things and them as support structures for the dahlias that I was growing. So the flowers that are in there are the dahlias. So I liked the sort of man-made as opposed to the natural forms, and the idea of the man-made being the support structure for the garden growth.
It's interesting that you've used like a ambiguous space for this.
Right, yeah.
So it removes it from like a landscape context.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things that I'm interested in is I don't paint the landscape by looking directly at the landscape that's in front, you know, that could be in front of me. It's, as I said, it's sort of put together from various sources, and it is not just the bucolic landscape. There's always this sense of the hand of people in the landscape. So I think that some of that comes from living in the city and seeing the influence on, you know, gardens and plant life with structures that people present. So I like that interdependence.
Mm-hmm. And I see some of your oils are on canvas, some are on panel.
Yeah, this is on panel.
Yeah, is there certain characteristics of each that you're aiming for with each painting, or?
Yeah, I think that the panel, I mean, I work quite a bit on paper with gouache as well. And the panel is a kind of a resistant surface like the paper is. Mm-hmm. And the canvas is a little bit more flexible. So it's just a different kind of surface. I think that the panels can be more jewel-like in terms of the way the color gets built up, because the surface is smoother. It just has a different kind of surface quality and more luminescent, maybe, mm-hmm. in some ways.
Yeah, it definitely has a glow to it.
Yeah.
So Andrea, we're gonna zero in on your piece here. I wanted to ask you about the use of text in your work, that there's the meaning, but also the composition of it. And like when you're putting your pieces together, are you treating them as blocks or lines? And how do you go about it?
Yeah, it's complicated with the text, and it takes a certain amount of confidence to put out writing and present it as a poem. When I do so, I always feel like I'm sort of wading into someone else's turf, but I'm primarily a visual artist, and one of the things I appreciate about language overall is the way it encodes meaning and presents it in a visual form. So these are meant to be read, not decoded. But I think that poetry in particular opens up your mind to when you read a poem, you have to sort of be open to not knowing exactly where the artist is taking you. And I kind of like that aspect. So but in any case, it's all, and then in the end, when I have a confidence, I've written a poem, I want to put it out there, pair it with an image or embed it in an image somehow and put it up on the wall, then it becomes very much a compositional puzzle, you know, because I need to present work that's first of all visual. So, you know, a solid composition, something solidly graphic, something balanced, symmetrical, but not too symmetrical. You know, I have my certain things that I love and certain things that I don't venture into circles, you know. So, but that's, you know, graphic language and communicating through symbols and forms. And this is just my way of sort of arranging those elements and those visual tools, and putting them together. And in this case, this is an image of a turf-built house, envisioned, you know, with a cut through. I don't know what that's called. That's like an elevation showing maybe some of the timbering that's happening inside of the traditional Icelandic turf house. So instead of a footprint, this is an elevation, but I just love the form. I didn't make that up. I copied it right from an archaeology book about turf houses, and I just read it as such a strong visual form for burrowing, for going under, for going inside, for turning inward, or from finding protection inside of a structure. And the poem itself, I know you've zoomed in on it, it probably deals with those themes, but I can't exactly remember what I was writing there. In certain atmospheric conditions, the mountain and sky exchange borders. Blue into white, gray into blue, mountain dissolves into sky. Like turf and skin, the boundary is permeable. Where does self end? Where does other begin? And so it's like turf and skin. So that's why I brought that turf house in there, because I was thinking about permeability. And another piece in the series has to do with the, this was all happening right when the virus was really picking up steam. And I was overseas, sort of cocooned inside of this shelter where the virus was sort of, you know, getting into human skin. And that was sort of part of my response to the pandemic.
Thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome.
Kellyann, here you are again.
So oftentimes when I paint, I work my way through a series, or I try to imagine how can I recreate this scene in a number of different ways or at different stages. Also, I think in a response to being a landscape painter from observation and thinking about how do you capture these ephemeral series of moments into one space. And obviously fires move very quickly and fiercely. And this painting is similar to the last one, Rebirth, in that it's about what happens towards the end of one of these fierce fires and what's left standing. I also thought this painting could look like the beginning of a fire, when things are dried out, and again, the trees are bare. It could be either the beginning or the end of a fire. And I also wanted to share in the chat an article from NPR, or a story from NPR about these controlled burns, and how the California government is actually engaging the Native Indigenous communities in helping. They're partnering now to also participate and work together on these controlled burns. So again, it's something that's very, very fascinating to me, that an actual controlled fire could prevent a more disastrous and horrific fire where, again, human lives are lost. And basically, I think anytime a fire or a tornado or a hurricane happens, it's always a reminder that nature, in a sense, bottom line, is in control. And I think something that we can learn from these indigenous communities is that they tried to find a way to live with nature in a way that's more harmonious, or to respect it. And I suppose that's why I keep coming back to the imagery in the paintings. Is I admire nature. I'm in awe of it. I'm afraid of it, and completely fascinated.
Thank you. So Victoria, this piece started out as 2 separate pieces, correct?
Yes, yes. So these were originally 2 different artworks. Actually, the one on the right is a collage of an artwork that I did not love, and so I cut it up and I and I created a new piece out of it. But I really love the juxtaposition of these 2 images. So the one on the left is my apartment, again, very close to the water. So thinking about my relationship to these flooding waters, but it's in a very old building, and it's been layered with with fake floors and tiles and paint. And so this is actually a very textural piece. You can see, you can see here, this is acrylic paint that I kind of painted and then peeled off, which is such like a fun activity. And the wooden floors here are actually cut pieces of paper that I layered one on top of the other. And so you start to, and I feel this a lot, and I see this a lot in my apartment, where I start to see parts of the layers peel up or poke out. That reminds me of the history of this place. And so that is, again, juxtaposed with the water here that has been kind of sectioned out in ways, right? So I've created waves by kind of cutting up old waves. So you get this layering of the water. The water is always moving. It comes back, it goes away, it comes back, it goes away. We have the shells that kind of litter the rock wall and glimpses of the sea life underneath. And then the wave just really kind of protrudes onto that landscape. It really, it becomes aggressive. And the shape of it mimics that acrylic paint, that it mimics that kind of layering of the floor, and the kind of, the way that it kind of overtakes the space. And then thinking, I like to think about the use of white as an active erasure, right? So we always start by working out on white surfaces, but we can also erase away with white. White paint is a very easy way to do this. And then there are, of course, societal implications for the act of white as erasing. So the white has this textural element to it, representing the waves, and then we start to get hints on the top and the bottom. On the top, we get some of the similar colors of the wood floors. It kind of disappears into that whiteness. And on the bottom, we get the hints of the waves as, again, they disappear, and we are left with what? That's the kind of the finish of it. What is left in the white space? These things are very kind of, boxed in, and they relate to one another. And then we have this kind of emptiness. So we will see.
Great, thank you. And Joan, we have another of your collage pieces here.
So this piece is, a combination of handmade paper on the right side, which I actually made at a paper making workshop like 30 years before I used the paper. I kept it in my drawer, and I kept thinking, what am I going to do with this paper? But I finally had a stack of the stuff that I'd made, and I decided to use it for these collages. So the gray and white paper is actually a handmade paper that I made. And then the other parts of the image are woodcuts that I just printed on different papers with different colored inks, and then just collaged the shapes together after I cut them out. cut them out either with an X-Acto knife or with the scissors. And then I have like shapes littered all over the place that I just select and try different images with different color combinations. So it gives me a kind of freedom in terms of placing things and judging whether I think they work together or not. It allows me to play.
It's beautiful. Thank you. So that is the end of the exhibition. Does anybody have any final questions for any of the artists to each other?
I just have a question for Kellyann, who does the fire, right? You're the one who does the fire. What are you talk about being a landscape painter, but are you painting fires from observation or from pictures or from memory?
These paintings in particular, they are coming from like a combination of things like video stills and from secondhand resources. But I do a whole other set of paintings that are plein air, and I would say more traditional plein air observational paintings. For many years, I've been a plein air observational painter, both working in natural rural landscapes, as well as I live in New York City, and for many years I worked from Brooklyn rooftops. And again, working in this manner is fairly recent, although a couple of years now. Again, I started working this way in around 2016. Something kind of snapped at me during the 2016 presidential election. And I felt like I needed to do something as again, a cathartic release and a response.
Have you been out to California to see the fires?
I've been to California, but I have not actually been there for the fires, no.
Yeah, it's interesting actually to see it after the fires too. You should probably.
Yeah, I was actually there in California right before the pandemic started. I mean, that really hit us here. Was there in January 2020, and I did see some of the regrowth coming back. You could see actually where the fires had moved across the hills, and then you could see where things were growing back across some of the hills. But I wasn't there during the actual fire at that point. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm also painting from like Victoria. I've been also painting about floods, and I've had the unfortunate now experience of being in New York during Sandy and Ida. Lucky for me, my immediate street was okay. And actually, I have to do a shout out. I'm not sure if my colleague Brooks is still here. My colleague Brooks Frederick, who is also a painter and a landscape painter and from New Orleans, has been hosting a Hurricane Ida fundraiser. But and I'm thinking about artists like Turner and again other landscape artists that have responded to the landscape in many different ways. Sometimes imagined, sometimes a reaction to things they may have seen or heard about, or using the landscape as a symbolic reference for what's happening in the world, both a literal response to what's happening in the world and also symbolic reference for what's happening in the world. A lot of the American regionalists like Grant Wood and the Hudson Valley painters painted in a similar way. They weren't always witnessing or seeing everything, but were using the elements of the destruction of nature as a symbol for how humans' interaction with nature and what we're doing to the planet.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's beautiful. It's very interesting and very evocative. I was just curious where it came from.
Any other questions? Okay, well then we'll end here. Thank you to all the artists for your wonderful work. And thank you everyone for coming tonight. We've recorded tonight's Zoom, so we'll post it on our YouTube channel in the next few days. So you can watch it again or send it to someone who couldn't make it tonight. And the show is up through October 24th, if you're able to come down, and you can also see it on the website. So thanks everyone for coming, and have a great night.